Thanks for coming back from lunch, and hopefully you will all be awake and you're able to follow my, I don't know if my accent is Indian or American or something confused in the middle. Hopefully my diction is clear. I'm going to be talking about something that was driven by the industry need some about 5, maybe 6 years ago, when they asked if my technology can be made into single use. I had previously been working with stainless steel versions of what I call settlers. And so with that, Chris Glasscock did some of the experiments that I was going to show you, and Braden Smith made the settlers that you will see some photographs of, and I get the pleasure of talking with you all. Good to connect with my national origin and lots of top scientists here. Pleasure. Thank you for the organizers for inviting me. So here's a quick outline of what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to briefly mention how my idea, or actually it's been around in other industries, inclined settlers, can be extremely useful in biopharmaceutical or biomanufacturing in general. I started presenting it, or my graduate students started presenting it in 1988, and so I'll take 1, maybe 2 slides on it. And then I will quickly move to the improved version because I saw the industry is scaling it up in a traditional, inefficient way, and we wanted to have a smaller footprint and more easily scalable version that we call compact cell settlers. And I will show a very quick transition from there, and some friends of mine who were familiar with the inclined settlers in principle, in practice even, they said, can I make it in plastic? And that is the origin of what we call Sudhin single-use disposable biosettlers. And that would be the main theme of the presentation for selective cell retention and primary clarification. That is in the title of my talk. But I'm more excited by some of the newer applications that we are exploring and finding it to be extremely useful. And those are in cell therapy manufacturing. Actually, how it turned out was some cell therapy company scientists came and asked us, hey, can we use your biosettlers to accomplish such and such a thing? And I said, why not? And he said, well, it worked exactly as you predicted. And so it is not something that I saw. I had the vision to take it into cell therapy manufacturing. They had a need, and they wanted me to see if it will work. And so I'll give you 2 examples of some ongoing work. One is with induced pluripotent stem cell clusters, which they had a pain point of losing those clusters when they had to do daily media exchanges because the growth factors were not very long-living, and they had to keep on changing it on a daily media basis. And so our settling device helps retain 100% of the clusters while they can remove the spent media and return and add the fresh media. And here is another, again, driven by academic and industrial need, where you have microcarrier beads on top of which you have attachment-prone or adherent cells, such as maybe mesenchymal stem cells. And it is a pain for any practitioner after the cells have grown to confluence to separate the detached cells from the microcarriers, very labor-intensive, whereas we can do it in a relatively pain-free process. We are still working on fine-tuning the protocols. I'll show you 1 slide, and not, if there's no time, I might rush and just show you photographs, and if you're interested in some of these ideas, we can talk more about it. And very last couple of slides, if there is time, I will talk about how our biosettlers are being evolved, being developed into inclined settling bioreactors, where it has the benefits of inclined settling, which is our central theme of all the biosettlers. And I'll talk about what all it can do, of course, selective cell retention and many other such good things. With that as the overview of what I'm going to talk about, here is an introduction. Some time ago, like about starting from about 85, I was a professor. That was my first job at University of Colorado. I was there for about 29.5 years, and I wanted to do something new and rejuvenating. So I took early retirement, and I started my company. But this work, Brian Batt, who's the first author on the paper I listed, he worked with murine hybridomas at that time, and one of my colleagues, Robert Davis, who's the middle author in that first paper, has done a lot of work on fluid mechanics of inclined settlers with plastic beads. And over lunch, faculty lunch discussions, he would say how we could separate small beads from large beads using inclined settlers. So I gave Brian the task of seeing what, I have a strange, well, maybe a lot of you do also have this gift or a problem, which is when everybody else is happy with the status quo, I look at some problems where that can be hopefully solved. And some of the problems that we had at that time in cell culture is dead cells keep accumulating in a batch or a fed batch bioreactor. And this is like in some lighter informal talks, I would say, people are usually killing the goose that lays the golden egg. If only you can take pains to not kill the cells or keep only the live cells and remove the dead cells, you can continue to get their secreted product out, in this case monoclonal antibody or any glycosylated protein from a Chinese hamster or a cell. So the concept of, well, let me skip everything else, but the inclined settler that I mentioned, the inlet into that, from the bioreactor, we pump a mixture of live and dead cells, because we hope our cells are 90 plus, 95 plus, 99 plus viable, but reality is over time, the viability keeps going down. So if we send a mixture of live and dead cells, I am not going to talk too much about the magic of what happens, fluid mechanics and so on, but essentially, in very short summary, if you have two particles, two cells, a mixture of any particles and cells that settle at two different velocities, settling velocity in the vertical, in a quiet, non-stirred zone, then you can adjust the flow up the inclined settler such that the slower settling particle is washed out. The vertical component of the flow is such that it's faster than the settling velocity of the slower settling body, and it gets washed out. And all the larger ones that settle at a faster rate, a higher sedimentation velocity, for any fluid mechanics in the audience, we are talking about Stokes sedimentation velocity here. And they settle so much faster that even if you push them up against, they will continue to come down. So this is a clean, let's say, barrier-free way of separating live cells or bigger cells and taking dead cells or smaller cells out. And later on, when the industry with CHO cells was moving away from roller bottles or adherent cell cultures to suspension cultures, we also moved in 1994 into demonstrating that the same principle applies for CHO cells. And in fact, the physics, the fluid mechanics, gravity really is agnostic to what cells you're dealing with. You call it CAR T cells, you call it mesenchymal stem cells, it doesn't matter. It depends on the differential settling velocities. So when my student first presented this work in San Francisco at 1988, there was some kind of a mixed reception. I mean, people said they liked it, but it's not crazy, very slow. But 2 years later, when I had another conference to go to in San Francisco, a friend of mine at a Chiron company at the time said, hey, I see that you're coming to our city. Why don't you spend an extra half an hour or maybe 2 hours visiting our facility in Chiron? And there I saw my child. I call it my child because this is the first time it has ever been used. I'm the one who introduced it to biotech manufacturing. If somebody has any news to me, I'd be happy to hear, but I don't think there was any instance of BioSettlers or inclined settlers before. So I see my 1 liter bioreactor grown into 5 liter stainless steel bioreactor, my inclined settler made into multi-plate or what they call lamellar settler, and this guy, he's a PhD virology guy, he said it worked exactly as your algebraic equation suggested how to scale it up. So I don't take any credit for scaling it up. It's just laws of physics and algebra and so on. So in the next slide, you will see, did I go in the wrong direction? Okay, this is the right slide. Up in the so-called one, or let's say top left, is that old friend from Chiron. After it got acquired by Novartis, he kind of took early retirement and they started selling these himself made it in the garage, inclined settlers. He sold it to many places in Korea, Taiwan, Japan. Many people there use it. Bayer, to whom I had gone a few times and given lectures, they were having a pain, which is that their factor rate, which is very sensitive or getting cleaved or degraded by keeping it too long in the cell culture media. And so I see that time is running out, and so I'm halfway through my talk, so I better rush. I'm going to cut off some of the stories and tell you Bayer uses it for factor rate. At that last top right, that is a 3,000 liter bioreactor with the settlers. That was by Roche, Germany, in Pennsburg. When people were happy with it, I see a problem in that slide. There's a huge footprint of a stainless steel scaffold holding up the inclined settler, and I see there's so much space on that scaffold that is not being used. So I came up with what I call cylindrical conical geometry, where all the space about the footprint is completely filled with settlers. It is a lot more efficient, and in fact, it is so efficient that not only mammalian cells, we use it to settle yeast cells, which are smaller. Smaller settler cells, meaning smaller settling times. Normally, you would want a much bigger settling device. Long story short, when people saw this guy who was working at Genentech and knew about the Pennsburg's thing, he said, hey, it looks interesting. Can you make it in single-use plastic? And also, can we use it for clarification of cells after fed batch? This is from our lab using the BioSettler as an attachment to a bioreactor, a Pindar 5-liter bioreactor. I'm going to hurry through, looking at the clock here. So this is some of our early experiments in 2017. What you can see, this was a failed experiment when we had a lot of dead cells, like maybe 50% or so dead cells. And the red line is what is sample from, the blue line is what is from the bioreactor. You can see a small peak between 8 and 10 microns. Those are dead cells. Anything about 15 to 30 microns, those are live cells. And the red line shows what is going on top of the settler. And you can see that the settler effluent is selectively removing the dead cells and not removing any live cells at all. And in the next slide, because people ask me, what happened to the cells at the bottom? Are they going to die in the settler, or what is coming back into the bioreactor? So the additional, a couple of months later, in June of 2017, we collected samples also from the bottom, and that is the green line. What you can see is, once again, and this is a healthy experiment where there are not too many dead cells in there, so you don't see a separate peak between 8 and 10. But what you can see is there's a lot of cell debris being removed, and the bigger of the live cells are being selectively put back into the bioreactor. That is some of the features of what our settler does. We remove cell debris, and we return the live cells, and we don't have a filter which gets clogged after, let's say, 3 weeks or 4 weeks and sieving protein and so on. I did not start a company at that time. I just published it away. Only a handful of companies I know of have scaled it up themselves. And what I think is a very inferior technology, filtration membranes, that became the standard for retaining all the cells. If ATF or any other filter cannot discriminate between live and dead cells. In fact, it will keep on throwing all the cells back in, and you will see a high cell density, but gradually the dead cells will increase so much in amount that they will clog the bioreactor, they will sieve the protein, and so on. So I'm switching topics to the main application. A friend of mine asked me from Genentech, can I use this single-use disposable settler for clarifying? And for example, Genentech is not a perfusion bioreactor company. All the work that I've done shown here is perfusion. Bayer and other people, it's all perfusion. Now I'm switching to fed batch culture. There's a photograph coming up, and here is one. So our settler is up there at 150 the diameter, and this is at a different company, not Genentech, but another company. In Genentech, we used the first version, and it failed miserably. I was right there, and I saw what was happening, came to my lab, switched a few things around, it worked great, and then this is a second company. And what they have, the pain point for fed batch cultures, to clarify, is when you achieve very high cell densities. I'm talking maybe 50 million or higher than that cells per milliliter. Filters will get clogged, centrifuges will get clogged, and you have to keep on discharging them and so on. And so they were asking for a relatively clean solution, something that does not have barriers that will get clogged, something that will not need, for example, clouds of cells coming up when you backflush or when you try to empty it. So here, I don't think the pointer works, but hopefully in my settler, you can see at the bottom is a rich or concentrated cell clump settling down. At the top, hopefully from this picture, you can imagine that it's a clarified liquid. The starting material from that carboy or the cell culture broth reservoir, the NTU or turbidity was about 2,000, and what is coming out on top had an NTU of less than 100. Of course, the dead cells and cell debris will come out if they have not clumped together. So you would have to go through a secondary filtration, a depth filtration maybe, or whatever. And that filter will not get clogged as much because the bioburden is so much lower on that. Whereas if you try to use a primary filtration with a tangential flow filtration, it'll get clogged much more rapidly. So cells will accumulate. And so this is the data. In fact, this is the first slide. Let me quickly go through. Here is somebody trying to empty the reservoir, and I don't know if you can see at that bottom corner, the effluent is getting collected, very, very clarified. In the next slide, that lady is looking at it to see if there are any settled cells at all in the so-called clarified the reservoir, and there were no cells to speak of. So it is essentially, that is what I call my money slide. It shows that it works for whatever it was intended for. And afterwards, we still have a lot of, once all the amount in the reservoir has been used up, we still have about 3.8 liters of volume in here, and now we are taking it out through an aspirator, and it's a little bit cumbersome, but hopefully you can see how clarified that supernatant is, and in the bottom you can see a pellet, almost as if it was centrifuged. But I grant you, there's absolutely no centrifugation. It is working at the normal Earth's gravitational field, except I won't call it 1G. I'll call it maybe close to something like maybe roughly about 100 G or so. As soon as the flow is stopped, the pellet forms immediately, and we can harvest all of that liquid out. So this is all I knew when I was there taking photographs is just the NTU measurements, which they've measured immediately. I don't have data on antibody recovery and so on. But we did the same experiment in our lab in Longmont in Colorado, in our lab. And long story short, all that you have to, I mean, we continue to, it's a flow-through system. And once we finish flowing 6 liters, or we started out with 9 liters, and remember that the content of the settler itself is about 3.8 liters. So we remove the rest of it. But the bottom line is we get 97.9% of the antibody recovered in the supernatant. And if you measure the total protein, once again, we have a high recovery. So my time is up. So I will just quickly show you, this is a I'll run through the next slide without taking any things. This is a newer version of the same settlers. We have different ways of aspirating from different times, so it's all made much simpler. Here's an application with iPSC cells from somebody who was having problems, daily media exchange, and we are using our settler. And here is what is going on. The left panel is what is going on clusters and a lot of single cells. The middle slide is what is coming back, and the top side is the effluent along with spent media. We don't remove any clusters at all in the spent media, and there's not only at 2 hours, but 24 hours and so on. The performance is just like that. So here again, this is too complicated a slide to explain, but it's a smaller version of our settler, 100 milliliters to 150 milliliters in volume. This is a mock-up of microcarriers with red fluorescent beads, and we use CHO cells as a mock-up of Chinese hamster, CHO cells as a mock-up for mesenchymal stem cells, because one of our clients is interested in separating the detached MSC cells from microcarriers. Essentially, we have so far gotten about 70+% recovery of cells and 0% beads in our harvest, and we are still trying to up the recovery. And so I'm going to skip all this. The last summary is we are converting our settler into a bioreactor, so you don't have to shuttle between the biosafety cabinet and incubator. You can use our settler in which we can measure pH and DO, and we can control it, and it'll be an incline settling bioreactor. In the next 2 months or less, it should be there. So this is what I talked about. I think I should stop now, and thanks for your patience, thanks for your attention, and if the chair would allow, I'd be happy to answer any questions. If you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand. I can't see any. Yeah, go ahead, please. Yes.
Yeah, hi. My name is Pratik Gupta. I'm from Sudhin Biopharma. Very nice talk, Professor Kompala. A question on the clarification application for the inclined settler. What are your thoughts on, how does it compare with using polycationic polymers like PDAD-MAC, which are used to, flocculate the cells? So how does this, in terms of efficiency, how does it compare? That's also typically used for very high cell densities, of the order of 50 to 60 million cells. So I just wanted to understand.
Good question, thank you. I forgot to mention a lot of details in here. Single cells take too long to settle, and what we do is simply reduce the pH, just like the kind of pH you have in protein A chromatography columns. I think any pH less than 5.5 is enough to clump the cells, and of course, if your antibody is stable enough, you use something like 3.5 pH or so, so that is not a problem. The antibody is very stable, and we actually have a very laminar flow inside, and we think we can very quickly, very thoroughly characterize the residence time in here. So one of my pet ideas is that later on, if you are going to use something like a viral inactivation, this accomplishes it right at the very next step from the bioreactor. If at all your bioreactor should, God forbid, get contaminated with a virus, my preference would be to remove it right next to the bioreactor rather than letting it pass through various chromatography columns and then contaminating the whole process along the way and then remove it. So the trick is, instead of using any beads like you, I think, suggested, just simply adding citric acid or acetic acid to get the pH down to 5.5. The cells in your own lab, you will see it clumping and falling like a rock.
Okay, so thank you very much, Dr. Dhinakar, and I really thank you for this wonderful approach. I think it will save a lot of depth filters, which we are using in a lot of biomanufacturing, and will reduce the load of plastic waste. So thank you.